Welcome, Warlords, to Saga THORSDAY. I'm your host, Raj. Today we are here with a fan favorite, Stephen Haldeman III. How's it going, my man?
How's it going? Doing pretty good.
Excellent. So we're having you back on. You helped us out with the Franks last time in an epic 4-part mini-series. Hopefully, we're just going to keep it one long file here this time.
Yeah, absolutely.
However long it goes. Absolutely, we'll be fine. That's kind of how I'm rolling nowadays. But so we're going to talk about the Pagan Rus, however you'd like to pronounce. Is there a proper pronunciation there?
I've always pronounced it Rus, and that goes up and down. But usually, you see a lot of the vowels that are used and stuff like that pronounced there. So Pagan Rus is what it's been for a long time, and I think even if I got corrected correctly that it was Rus, I probably would still say Pagan Rus anyway.
Yeah.
It's a force of habit or something like that. But Pagan Rus. So.
I usually do say Pagan Rus, but I hear most other people say Pagan Rus. So
right.
I don't know what the right way there is, but awesome. So obviously, we're diving into some second edition version of these guys here, and the game's been out about 6-7 months now. So,
right.
How have you been enjoying the second edition?
There's been a lot of changes, and I've really been enjoying it, though. I don't think there's been any game that I've had a bad game, and from the first time that I played it, I was really hesitant, really worried, like I'm sure a lot of the longtime players were, and the first game, and I think it was I played Vikings, because I think I played Vikings the first time ever for first edition. My opponent Sean played Norse Gales. We loaded up with what we thought were extreme combos, and we threw them down. In that first kind of big engagement, we said, all right, this is still absolutely Saga, and it was just fun to see it reimagined a little bit. A lot of my worries went away. A lot of my grievances and stuff like that were smoothed out, or after I played it a couple times and stuff, were irrelevant. I've had a great time each time I've played it. So I've been really enjoying the Crusades era stuff too, and so I've been trying to play as many of those as I've been playing Viking Age at the same time.
Yeah, they're throwing a lot at us here to start with. So I know most of the folks I know are still trying to digest the Viking Age stuff, and then the Crusades are already upon us. So cool. So have you been playing Pagan Rus the most, would you say, or you just?
So far, I feel like both Pagan Rus and Irish have been the two factions that I've enjoyed playing the most. I've probably had the highest amount of wins with. Pagan Rus are also another one that I feel like I don't see show up so often in the tournament rankings and stuff too, and that's always been kind of surprising to me, because as soon as I picked them up, I realized that a lot of the gimmicks that were the Pagan Rus last time have kind of been thrown away, and it's a more playable actual board. It has some substance to it, where you're not just relying on a few mechanics to really win you the game. Now, there's a few major, congruent
some
abilities.
Cool stuff in here, yeah.
Cool, yeah. And they're just as devastating, but it's not as much of a one-trick pony as it was last time. And I feel like the last Pagan Rus created a really stagnant play, where a lot of times they were doing the blizzard, whether they needed to do the blizzard or not, and you just sat around the whole time. And the way they've kind of changed that now, I think it makes much more playable, a lot more fun for both sides. So
cool, yeah. Obviously, it was a very powerful faction previously, so it's kind of nice. They can tone it back down and then give you some variation within the board itself as far as how you want to tackle things. So what models do you use for your Pagan Rus? Gripping Beast or different?
I have some of the guys I'm hoping to transform into some newer Pagan Rus guys are the newer Footsore Vikings. And then I have a mix of kind of my old Yalm's Viking kit and some of the Vikings from the Saxon Miniatures Company, which I think is Warlord now.
Yeah.
I think these are some of those beautiful Viking sculpts too, and they had came out first. Everybody had a helmet. Everyone had cool features and stuff. I just really appreciated them a lot, and so I've been using a lot of those. And I made some kind of late Anglo-Dane guys last year for Saga Storm that were mixed out of some of the Russian kit and some other stuff too. So they've been good guys to fill in also for hearthguard and other kind of heroic figures and stuff. So
cool.
I have the Footsore guys are going to take me a bit to get to too, so I'm trying to get through Irish first and then go through some of those too. So
yes, the painting queue is always a lengthy one.
Right.
So, well, let's dive in with the troop options for these guys, and it's pretty straightforward, similar to the Vikings in some respects here, obviously. But the warlord, hearthguards, and warriors have no equipment options, so it's just your standard sword and board kind of guys. So you're going to have plenty of options to close ranks throughout your battles here.
Right.
Some war bands don't get that at all, but
that's actually one of the reasons I've enjoyed playing them too, is because I feel like we were all kind of drawn to Javelin war bands right off the bat. Everyone is enjoying Javelin stuff. And Pagan Rus, after we realized how strong just closing ranks were, then suddenly the standard infantry were a little bit more appealing, especially if you had a board that could throw on some defensive abilities too.
Yeah, the close ranks, the mileage for me kind of really depends. If you have a couple abilities that can really soup up, add defense dice, and kind of work that mojo there. But the levies do get the option for javelins, or they're just armed with javelins, so no options there. That's just what they got. So yeah, that's about it. So as we think about these abilities as we go through them here, are we favoring hearthguards or warriors, or is there going to be an even mix? Is there a place for levies as we think about these?
I feel like there's always an even mix is always going to be pretty strong. And javelins in general, as we either complain about or excited about, are a lot better in this edition. And even after with this new FAQ changing the rules on javelins, it's still such a good utility unit that I feel like if you have a war band that has an option for javelins, just go ahead and put at least one unit in there too. And a lot of times for Pagan Rus, there's no shooting abilities other than one that shows up on the board. And so sometimes you want to be able to throw javelins. You want to be able to have some sort of ranged attack. For example, if you're fighting Norse Gales and they use the determination ability to, at the end of the fight, make it so no one can target them in melee, at least you have an option to try to pepper them with javelins or some other stuff there too. So it just creates a good utility unit.
Yeah, you just want to have some versatility there. Something to throw at, some horse troopers perhaps. You always want to have a little something to mix it up.
And then the Hearthguard, I feel like, are honestly the better choice for the board for some of the reasons is the outside of the environmental abilities that you see show up, you have all these abilities that are modifying armor up and down and taking the total after you've changed it to give you some sort of effect. And since the Hearthguard have a higher armor value, inherently they're going to be able to, at the same time, there's some abilities that favor mix in this case is usually what I honestly, too many real wrong choices to take in Pagan Rus, but there's a lot of things, and we can talk about kind of the details of that a little bit later on too. But like you said, there's very few options unless we're looking at special character guy, and then it's basically a different army. So we can talk about that.
Yeah, I saw the Rurik's. Get the horses,
it makes it look like they have a huge unit selection at the beginning, and then you kind of look at it and go, "Oh, I guess just with this one guy."
Okay, cool. So that's what we're dealing with. We'll keep that in mind as we take a look at the battle board. Up top, everything's looking pretty standard there as far as I can tell. So why don't we just pop down to the first ability here, Quigon. Now this is a melee ability. Looks like Hearthguards and Warriors only. And it uses any one of the dice here. And it says if your unit is within short of your Warlord, gain 3 attack dice, defense dice, or a mix of both. 5 if you happen to use a rare dice. So kind of a decent ability here. So 3 attacks for 1 dice. It's better than the combat bonus. A lot of other warbands can get something like this without having that warlord restriction. So not a super
and so
great.
Honestly, it's probably one of the most tame abilities on the board. One of the cool things about this board is a lot of times you'll find 7 or 8 abilities that you think are really good or really playable, and then some that you never use. And honestly, this one kind of falls into the category where you say this is one of the lower powered ones, and it's a good kind of foreshadowing for the rest of the board if that's the case, because it's pretty good. When I first look at a board, one of the things I zoom in on is what abilities can I use with any dice no matter what. And so that one in Blood Feud that we see later on are some of the ones that show up immediately. In that case, like you said, getting 3 attack dice or 3 defense dice for any dice is pretty nice compared to just combat pool. If you have nothing else going on, you just want to get a little boost. But what's also more attractive, I think, is the defense dice in this case. Because I feel like defense dice in this edition are way better than they used to be. One of the main reasons for that is there's no cap anymore. There's no cap so you could potentially be rolling 10 defense dice in addition to the 3 that you got from hits or something like that, and have an extremely good chance of surviving. So any ability where I see extra defense dice is a good deal, especially in a closed ranks type of army.
Absolutely, yeah. So as we mentioned, the closed ranks option, you have a great ability right here to just max out those defense dice. And if you want 3 attack dice, you got it. If you want 3 defense dice, you got it there.
Or mix it up.
Yeah, whatever works, baby. So the rare dice are rares pretty set on this board for certain abilities, or
not at all? Not at all. There's one ability that has to have a rare. There's another ability that really gets better when you have a rare, but then that's it. You got Quigon here in your activation pool, and that's all. So if you have extra rares and you haven't, you're done, you're full on dice or something else like that, this one is a good one. A lot of times I favor White Wolves, though, instead if we've got it, and we can look at that one as we scoot down there, too.
Okay, good deal. Kind of interesting ability, and I kind of like it. The restriction, kind of sucks, but I like anything that can encourage aggressive play and moving up your warlord and making sure he's on the battle line. I think is kind of themey and fits in with what I imagine these guys are all about. So I don't have an issue with that.
Yeah, and I think clustering together for these guys has no downside. Later on with the ability of the pack, we'll see that when we're all clustered around the same unit, we get a big benefit because we get some bonus attack dice that we're throwing at them for no reason and stuff. So there's no real downside for them, I don't think. The only thing that Pagan Rus really don't have is a mechanic to get rid of fatigue throughout the army. So that's really the only downside of clustering together ever in Saga, has always been that if you lose one unit, it pops to everybody else. But these guys are really resilient. Outside of maybe the Scots or a few others, I don't know that there's a tougher warband as far as just defense dice and capabilities. Irish maybe too. The Irish and the Scots are real defensive, so real strong ones. So
cool. Well, I think we've said enough about Quigon. Do you want to pop down to the Long Winter and describe that ability?
Right. So I'll read it too. The Long Winter is in orders until the start of your next turn. No unit may charge or shoot at a unit more than M away at the start of the charge or shooting attack. So this is kind of the ability that replaced the infamous Blizzard ability for the Pagan Rus in the past, which was if you played any sort of cavalry army or range 12 bow army or something like that, it was the most obnoxious thing to play against. I love playing Steppe Tribes. Steppe Tribes is one of my favorite armies of the last edition. And boy, it was really unfortunate to have to go up against that all the time. This has been toned down a little bit. Everyone can still move M. And so Javelin guys, for example, aren't hurt at all. They're still operating exactly the same as they used to. Regular infantry guys, unless they have an ability, aren't going to be charging more than M anyway. So really this is just hurting cavalry and range 12 guys. And that's pretty nice if you're going to go up against a tournament where you see a lot of Normans or something else like that. Normans were really big. They might not be as popular after the FAQ that had come out. They kind of really hurt their feelings a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
But at the same time, a lot of armies that can take horses are going to take horses, and the Long Winter is a great way of kind of slowing it down. Or if you're scared of crossbows or something else like that, it's an excellent thing to do. So, you'll find that it synergizes kind of well later on when we're trying to just control different pieces of the terrain and stuff too. Which will be the kind of next ability there also.
Yeah, great ability. Obviously, it's going to be faction dependent, so probably maybe a third of the factions it'll definitely be useful, and then maybe a sprinkling of other factions would have a unit or two that could be affected. I'll say is that the last Romans, I did not care for this ability because I have the hearthguard cav and then all my shooters, so it was kind of a double. I'm getting burnt on both ends there, but yeah, good ability. Gives you incentive to get close, deal with these guys because you're not going to be able to do it at range. So cool, good Good ability there. I'm going to pop down to Blizzard, which once you get the long winter going, Blizzard is bound to show up, right? So this is an orders reaction ability. Designate one of your units. All open terrain within very short of a figure in that unit counts as uneven terrain until the end of the turn. All open terrain within very short of a figure.
So this is one of the ones that when you first read it, it doesn't initially sound too strong, or it doesn't make sense as to why that would be useful. But there's kind of two major scenarios for me where Blizzard is super useful. One of those is where you have some sort of unit that has jettisoned out and is going to get charged or something else like that, or cavalry's coming up to. Everyone is within, M away in charge distance. You put Blizzard on them, and suddenly they are in difficult terrain. They're in uneven terrain. So that means the guy who is exactly M away isn't going to be able to make his charge anymore. He's going to get close enough, but because he'll be entering uneven terrain, he'll have to drop down to short, which means he's going to have to take 2 activations to get in to charge that guy. Even better is when you are going again against the cavalry army. Mm-hmm. If cavalry is going to charge you, that means they're going to end their turn in uneven terrain, which gives them a fatigue. And so that's another one of the ways that you can be really strong with it too. So you can kind of stick a unit out there and use it to slow people down or force them to have to take 2 activations to get to you when it would normally only be 1 activation. And that synergizes again with the ability we'll see later on, Biting Cold. It's a great way of saying you have your premier melee unit that I stopped exactly M away from, and I hit Blizzard on him in your turn, and now you're going to have to use 2 activations to charge him if you want to come and get me, unless you have an ability that skips that or something, in which case on your second activation, I'll be able to use an activation reaction like Biting Cold and stop him dead for the rest of the turn. And so that's a great way of stopping big units, or like I said, trying to control the movement over a big area or something.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's it's very similar to the long war, just another way of slowing down the enemy, taking up more activations to get to you. So maybe you arrive with a fatigue or 2 when normally you would just go in fresh.
Exactly, and having a fatigue against these guys can be a bad deal, because later on, as you're changing your armor up and down, we get even more benefits. The very last ability of the board really pulls a lot of these together at the end. And we can get to that as we start going to abilities, or we'll just let it be the kind of cherry on top that makes the whole board just really strong, I feel like.
So I noticed the Long Winter and both Blizzard are uncommon. Is that kind of a hot dice on this board here?
This board's actually pretty forgiving for dice. There's one ability that's an uncommon that I really want a lot, and again, that's White Wolves when we go over. We can also get that with the rare. A lot of times I've ended up putting Blizzard on units because I didn't have anything else to put it on at the end. And it didn't occur to me initially when I started using it. We all kind of, when we activate out, and it can kind of get foggy in there as you're starting to number
yes.
And then to suddenly remember all of them are now, and short of that unit are going to have to take 2 activations to get to them. It becomes pretty strong. And so in some cases, you're really wanting it to go there. But again, when you look around the board, it's pretty forgiving. Lots of commons and uncommons and stuff across the board.
Okay, cool. You want to pop down to Black Bears there?
Black Bears is the first of the kind of melee abilities that is changing your armor up and down. In this case, it's a melee ability where we discard attack and or defense dice equal to your current armor to increase your armor by 1. This kind of allows some flexibility, and it kind of punishes the guys with higher armor, but there's some circumstances when we want to do that. There's sometimes where we're going to get charged, and we know that our attacks are going to be irrelevant or something like that, or somehow we found a cheap way, and we're loaded with dice for whatever reason on their turn. We found a cheap way to get some extra defense dice or a mix of both, and we know we're going to get more later on the turn. We can get rid of some of those defense dice and some of our attack dice to kind of compensate off the top. We also see some of the abilities across the board drop your armor by 1, and so for some reason, if you wanted to raise it back up, this would be one of the ways to do it. But I have to warn people that play Pagan Rus, there's about 3 abilities that are all dropping the armor and raising the armor, and you kind of dream of this perfect way to synergize them together. And it does show up from time to time, but a lot of times you're spending a lot of extra Saga dice to raise your armor up and down and discard your attacks and gain some attacks and discard some and drop your armor. And then at the end of it, you spent 5 Saga dice for maybe what you could have gotten with 2 Saga dice if you had just been keeping track of the numbers as you were going up and down. Mm-hmm. And we'll see that with some of the other abilities going along. But Black Bears is one that is one I actually don't use too often. These guys are pretty tough. So I can see, some warrior builds, or maybe with one of the heroes or something like that, where we have these lower armor guys in the form of Javelins or something like that. Those guys might get a better kick out of raising their armor. When your Levy unit gets charged or something, for instance, to get rid of your 3 attacks, you weren't planning on doing any damage anyway, you just wanted to survive. Levy can't close ranks, and you just say, I'm going to get rid of these 3 attacks or something like that, raise my armor up to armor 4, and just hope that that's going to help. Or hope that I put Blizzard on them or something else so they have a fatigue coming in, and I raise myself up again. So,
yeah, it's definitely an interesting ability. You can do some fun stuff with the order of things.
Right.
If they take your armor down, will now cost 1 less of your attack or defense dice to pop it back up. But yeah, it's kind of...
At the same time, though, too, you don't see too many abilities that raise your armor for 1 common. And so that's something
true.
that you can look at, too. And so you're just paying a related tax to, how tough your unit is at that moment. So it doesn't mean your hearthguard are always going to get hurt really bad. For some reason, you might have dropped yourself down 2 times, and you're sitting on such an abundance of dice or something like that it doesn't even matter. You get rid of a few here and raise yourself back up to a more respectable number or something. But with the amount of defense dice you're getting rid of or something, you might, again, be wasting it. You're hurting your brain too much over it sometimes. It's trying to get them back and forth. When really, maybe just 2 of these abilities was good instead of trying to link all 3.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good point. And then one thing I could see maybe with Hearthguard, particularly your warlord, is if you want to sacrifice those attack dice, going from armor 5 to a 6, if nothing else can modify it, is usually it's going to see you through basically almost any kind of attacks, as long as they can't get it back down to a 5. So depending what your opponent has, what you see coming, that could, if you need to keep your warlord alive, or a Hearthguard, the last guy or something like that.
Exactly.
If you have 12, 16 attacks, maybe you'll drop 5 to completely get it through scot-free.
It's kind of when your back's up against the wall. It may not look good on turns 1 to 3, but it might look a lot better on turns 4 to 6.
Yes. So, okay, cool. Well, I'm going to pop over to Frozen Wind up top there, using 2 common dice. This is another Order's Reaction ability, so 2 of those on this board. Kind of cool. And, okay, now this is I've felt the bite of this one.
This one's great.
Place a large measuring stick on the table so that at least one end is within medium of a table edge. Every unit with at least 1 model touched by the measuring stick takes a fatigue. So, one thing, the fact clarified, the measuring stick is exactly 1 inch, up to 1 inch wide. It's not...
Right. But honestly, I was surprised that they were that generous. I had always assumed it was just a line, but then they said like 1 inch wide. And it actually says that in the little Ragnar Answers section of the book, too.
Oh, right, okay.
It says down there, too, it says, I've clocked you, cheat. And then it goes on from there to tell it that it can't be wider than 1 inch. Which I feel like is a weird reference because nothing is 1 inch in Saga, but at the same time, we don't want it any bigger than that. I was fine with a line, so 1 inch is pretty generous.
Yeah, that's a good point. The sticks I use are probably maybe 3/8 of 1 inch wide, and if they're doing the Saga measurements,
the longer version of this one or something, the L of this one or whatever.
Definitely a very short would have been too wide. I think that would have been some beefy measuring sticks.
Right, because let me tell you, this is the best ability on the board. I mean, it still is. I said that Pagan Rus got away from their gimmicks, and in a way they did, because they have a very respectable board on the combat side that we're going to see later on. But this ability can be absolutely devastating. If someone's packed in close and it's going to take them 2 turns to get out of it or something, you're going to maybe toss on 7, 8 fatigues on their army before you guys get to putting the blows on each other or something. And then if you can still line it up, you can almost always get 2 units. And sometimes, who cares? You're going to hit one of your own units or something else. Sometimes you have to take that sacrifice. And not only that, but just the mechanic of kind of doing, if anyone ever did Warhammer with some of the templates that you had to lay it down and stretch it out or something like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun. It reminds me of that a little bit. It's fun to blast the whole rank of it. And it can be significant because, again, a lot of these abilities are about armor going up and down. So if you can pretty much guarantee that by the time they run into you, they're either going to, one, have not so many Saga dice on their board because they've had to spend them on the last turn to get rid of the fatigue you put all across the army, or two, they're already fatigued enough that some of your abilities are going to go way up or way down or all sorts of these things. You're going to be doing very well. Frozen Winds is the top one. If you compare it, for example, to Trapped on the Anglo-Dane boards, for 2 6s, we're passing around, 3 fatigue across the board, and this for 2 commons, I'm putting it down. So
yeah, and you're deciding who gets those fatigues. And it's a really interesting ability, and it's interesting because it's an orders of reaction. It's not during your turn. So
that weakens it a little bit. That keeps it from being too strong. Yeah,
obviously you can't set the fatigues down and then pounce on those units you just fatigued, but on the flip side, it's a really kind of a mind game, battle plan, just mess her up. Because one, you can do it at the end after they've allocated all their dice. So you can see, they didn't leave enough dice on the warriors there to shrug off, just to rest this fatigue away. And I can see that it's going to cascade down. They're not going to be able to do this ability the way that they were thinking. And just a great mind game. And then one thing that's with the size of the Saga board, you can hit
exactly.
You can hit any unit you want.
Right. 4 foot by 3 foot, you're not going to miss anything. You're going to be able to reach out and touch.
6 inches in, geometrically. If you just want to hit that one unit, you can definitely hit that one unit. But obviously the utility there is picking up the units on the side, whoever the warlord's hanging out next to.
And so in that same way, it's one of those ones where people get real finicky. Everyone will both be finicky. 4 people looking around and stuff. So I'm sure eventually it will cause a club argument or something at some guy's place, just because I don't know if you're touching that model or not, and you're just trying to exactly align it and all this sort of stuff. But with it being an inch wide now, I mean, it means that you can potentially clip. If 4 units were ranked up kind of close to each other, you could clip all 4 of them with that liner. It used to be only clip 2 in my mind or something, so it made it really strong. And for example, if we go back and we look at Blizzard now or something too, and you're trying to get to me, and I have all the fatigue on you also. We use terrain at the same time too. Boy, terrain is a lot different in this edition. And you can cluster yourself up in a way that they have to funnel into you, and they're going to get blasted with terrain or blasted with the wind the entire time as you just kind of clog the gap and move a little bit more forward if you want to. There's a lot of ways that, like I said, we're really controlling the board, and especially if we're thinking about it in the terrain phase too, we're looking pretty strong. We just don't want to give the guys too much terrain if they're going to sit in there and throw javelins at us the whole time or something. So.
No, that's a really good point. With the frozen wind, they're going to want to spread out, but with the long winter and the blizzard, they're not going to have the speed or the orders to get around because they're going to be slow, so they have to focus in on. So it's like a damned if you do, damned if you don't. You just got to take your licks against the Rus here. Okay, well, I'm going to let you do White Wolves. You mentioned this one a couple times, and
this one, there's kind of 4 all-star abilities in this board, I feel like, and this is one of them along with Frozen Winds. This is just an extremely strong combat ability in my mind. What it does is you reduce your armor by 1 and gain both attack dice and defense dice equal to your new armor value. And if you use a 6 with it, a rare, you remove a fatigue from the unit too. So this is where I talked about hearthguard being very good. For a single uncommon and hurting your unit, you get 4 attack dice and 4 defense dice. If you've done some other shenanigans, like use their fatigue or something else, and you were at armor 6, it's the best being armor 6 and hitting White Wolves and getting 5 attack and 5 defense dice. That's why I said when we look through a lot of these cool abilities on here, sometimes you have to say, is my appetite for attack dice just so large that I can't be sated? Am I to the point where I'm wasting dice on some of these others? Or sometimes you're playing it defensively, you're slowing them down with the winter and the winds, and you're only sitting on white wolves in case someone wants to fight with you. And sometimes I even have the problem, though, too, that I will put an uncommon on white wolves to start pretty much with the notion that if anyone wants to fight, I'm pretty ready to fight them with white wolves. It's a strong ability, especially if I close ranks or some other thing like that, too.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, it's slowing us down a little bit. Whether if we roll dice later on, we get rares finally, this is the ability that I want the rare on a little bit. And now I have the uncommon sitting on there, too. You have to make that decision before you roll your dice. And so you get your rare, and you say, God, I just want to put it on white wolves. It's perfect for this plan. Because then you can get away with doing something like picking a fight where you're going to pick up a fatigue that you really shouldn't have or something else, and hoping that just the mix of the blizzard helps you survive the next round or something like that. And then you were hoping for white wolves to wipe it out. But either way, white wolves, heck of an ability.
Yeah,
I really recommend it. It's a good one.
No, there's not a lot of ways to get 10 dice with one swipe of the dice here.
Just one uncommon.
Okay, cool. Yeah, actually.
So like I said, it's a much different board. Old Pagan Rus had no real fighting abilities like this. They had the cool stand like bears one, and they had another one to get some attacks or something like that. But it was nothing like one uncommon for 10 attack dice, 10 dice or something given to you too. So,
yeah, and Black Bears actually makes more sense now. Basically, you're taking yourself down. There's probably other abilities you can get it back up, but Black Bears is one where if you're gonna get a bucket full of attack dice by taking your armor down by 1, if you want to give half of those back, you can get the armor back up by using another dice.
And you could decide, you know, if you're being suicidal or something, you decide you don't want any of the defense dice, you can get rid of them. But again, Black Bears and White Wolves, I feel like fight with each other. They sometimes take the potency out of both a little bit for you. You're trying to be too generalist sometimes when you use both of them, and you've instead just kind of deadened the impact of both abilities and stuff. You say, maybe I should have just one of these. Because like we talked about with defense dice, they're a lot better now. If you're only planning on getting, 3 to 6 hits or something in the combat phase, already sitting on 4 defense dice, that's pretty nice. You might not need to mess with your armor too much, depending on what your expectation for that unit is there.
No, so 4 or 5 defense dice probably more than makes up for the Pippin armor most times, I would say.
And again, when we look at this last one, Wrath of the East, this all just explodes. It all gets way stronger. It's the wrath comes out for sure.
Okay. Great ability there. I'm going to go on to Blood Feud. This is another melee ability. It uses any dice. And some more armor stuff going on here. Reduce your unit's armor by 1 to reduce the opposing unit's armor by 1. Or want to go the other way, increase your armor by 1 to increase their armor by 1 as well. So tit for tat. Either way, you want it bloody, we'll make it bloody. If you want to just push them off there, we can do that too.
And this is great for this board doesn't really support a lot of suicidal units. It kind of supports enduring and sticking around. But if you want to be reckless and stuff, that's a great way of doing it too. Just being able to use one common to drop that warlord who has 3 fatigues on him because you hit him with the winds and all this other stuff like that, to go ahead and drop him down to armor 4 or something, that's really appealing.
Yeah, that's really good.
Full of fatigue. He can't take resilience. All his hearthguard are gone or something. And you have a pack of 7 warriors sitting there or something. You just want to throw them in, drop it down, find some more ways to get attack dice. You don't care what happens to the warriors because for whatever reason it's significant to remove that unit. Blood Feud is a great way to do it. Or on the reverse, when we think about being total defensive with Black Bears and Blood Feud is a great way for a warrior unit who doesn't plan on fighting back to jump all the way up to armor 6. They don't care about hurting the other unit, but suddenly for 2 commons, they raise it up by 1, and they raise it up by 1 more too. You're raising your opponent, but if your goal is just to survive, that's a great way, again, of doing it. This is really an ability about what your turn's mission is a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's cool. You got the option, set this on your board, wait for your opponent's turn, and seeing how things develop there. You have the option to go defensive or offensive, and just the common dice. Great utility there. Good ability.
And again, it's the only other one on the board that you can use with any dice. And so if you're hamstrung, you know that you can at least pull this, and cog it up there, it'll be okay. It's not the best one in the world if you have nothing else supporting it. But again, if you either want to be completely defensive or completely aggressive, great way to do it. Or if you just want to mess around with Wrath of the East that we see later on, that's a great way to do it too. So,
okay, cool. Can you jump up to Biting Cold there?
Absolutely. Biting Cold, well. I kind of said that 4 abilities on here I thought were kind of the premier ones to me, and Biting Cold is the other one. It's very similar to, I think it was called Frozen in their last one, which was, I think, you stopped the unit if they had a fatigue on them. In this case, this
couldn't activate again. That was right. The end of it. Yeah,
and that's nasty. And that's except that we have no requirement of having fatigue. It is Biting Cold, activation reaction. Trigger this ability after the resolution of a unit's charge, movement, or shooting activation. That unit may not be activated again this turn. And so it's great.
That's good. Yeah.
It's great to stack then with Blizzard again too. If you set yourself up to that there's no way someone's going to get to you without 2 activations to get there, Biting Cold will guarantee that it's a non-issue that turn. Or if you have the tendency for a big hearthguard unit that shoots or something, the composite bow hearthguard for the Byzantines, for example, or if you have one of the shooty Norman units or something else like that, this really stops them from being able to seesaw back and forth to come to get you, because as soon as they come forward, you're going to stop them, and then they're stranded. And so it kind of forces them to have to adapt to. This really slows down the hit and run guys.
Yeah, this is a tough ability to play against when you're trying to set your dice down and go against it, because especially if you have a mix of warriors and hearthguard, and you got one hammer unit for each. They can see, well, he loaded up the hearthguard, I'm going to stop them. Oh, he loaded up the warriors, I'm going to stop them. So now you have to do both, maybe, but neither as well. Or, if you just have the one unit, then you have these dice sitting there that aren't doing anything. It's not quite as bad in this edition, because at least those dice will carry forward to the following turn if you have the dice left over. But it's tough, because then you don't want to commit to those multiple activation hammers, and they get inside your head, man.
Absolutely. It really, like I said, there's a lot of fog when you're planning it out a little bit, and this is just one more of those things the Pagan Rus have to kind of mess you up in your planning process. But this is also really great for if an army has just one unit that's really supposed to put in a lot of their work. This would have been stronger in last edition, kind of like you were saying too, in the era of the possibility of 12-man hearthguard and stuff. You could do 12-man hearthguard nowadays, but it's not as scary as it used to be. Yeah. And this is a great way of shutting down, again, if you have a really mixed arms type unit or army or something, like Normans, like something else. You'll notice, though, you can't get too excited over it stopping everything, that resting is not included there, too. So you can't wait for someone to rest and then say, you're not going to do anything else. It's not that good. You're not able to pull one over like that. But again, look at the cost. It's a common and an uncommon. These are amazing costs for all of these abilities. There's only the Blizzard Long Winter and the pack that comes next that require only 1 dice. Everything else is a little bit flexible on most of the common dice. So it's pretty nice.
Okay. Yeah. So between Biting Cold, Frozen Wind, Blizzard Long Winter, you can kind of create some real nightmare scenarios for your opponent, but you're taking, that's five of your Saga dice if you go. So is there kind of a balance there? If you go overboard on all of these, you're not going to have the dice to power your own attacks or your own real hammer abilities here. So how many of these, between those 4, are usually using like 2 of them, or do you run all 4 at a time, or what? Just
every turn, usually, I'm going to be using Frozen Winds if I can. Obviously, in the late game, when you're down to 4 or 5 Saga dice or something, then you start to not consider, that might not be great. But at the same time, sometimes in the late game, that extra one more wave, when suddenly everyone's fatigue management has got off their rocker a little bit, there's fatigue all over the board, and then you only roll 3 Saga dice, but you decide you're just going to exhaust that unit, and that unit in the course of it too. That's a great way of stalling out the game also. But I really think that Frozen Wind and Biting Cold are usable abilities all the time.
The go-to.
Long Winter and Blizzard are very situational. Again, if I'm fighting another Pagan Rus army, or if I'm fighting Vikings or Norse Gales or something, the Long Winter is useless, so I'll never consider using it. The Blizzard is going to be situational. Again, like I said, I originally started using Blizzard just because I had extra dice, and I said, okay, I'll go ahead and put it on there. And then I realized the potential, especially if we have terrain choke points and other things like that, or if you're really wanting to muck around with one kind of premier unit. And that's where Biting Cold is always great. A lot of my people that I play regular will go in and out, have very agile units. We always have a lot of cavalry or crafty activations all set out a little bit. We're kind of crafty with it, and Biting Cold is really a thing that messes with that. You can't. It's not like the old. What was it called? The old abilities for Yolm's Vikings and Anglo-Danes, where you could stop intimidation and stuff like that. Where you just stop an ability, but you said, "Oh well, I'll just put another die on there, and then I'll get stuff done." In this case, you're done. It's great for paralyzing units, and because of the low cost. At the end of the game, again, stopping a warlord from being able to charge or move his guys around over to charge at you. Actually, you can't affect the Wee Obey or anything like that, but moving him around and stuff, that can be a big deal. So really, those two I'm going to be doing all the time. But like you said, if for some reason you wanted to do all of them, that's why, in my mind, something like White Wolves has a great value, because you can say, I'm still ready for combat in some degree, and I've spent all my other dice on this environmental stuff. And with Frozen Winds, we're hoping to have kind of a payout from using it at the end. And eventually, we're going to start overwhelming them because they don't want to use that many dice to do it. Again, if we're fatiguing somehow 3 units every turn or something like that, you're only spending 2 dice for them to potentially need to spend 3 dice, or the We Obey and 2 dice to undo it. You're wanting to get some attrition out of them a little bit there. So I'm always going to be willing to sacrifice those at least for the first 3 turns. So.
Good points there. All right, well, I'm going to move down to the pack here. Second to last ability. This uses a rare. This is an activation ability. Resolve a shooting attack against an enemy unit. You may roll 2 attack dice for each of your units within M medium of said enemy unit and containing at least 5 models. No Saga abilities can be triggered during the resolution of the shooting attack, so you can't soup it up with combat bonus, but they won't be able to use their own combat bonus or other anti-shooting abilities. So, okay, cool. I'm always a fan of abilities that let you shoot in non-shooting factions. I think it's kind of a fun. Definitely a utility piece here. Now this one is dependent on getting five-man units are pretty decent size.
It goes up and down for sure. It's sad that the warlord can't shoot in that case because he's considered
like the
size
old
4. Right. I think this is kind of in place of that old ability where the warlord's shooting all around him, and it's a lot more nuts. Yeah, exactly.
He's hitting himself.
Yeah, I always wonder exactly what that's supposed to look like.
The mechanics,
But, right.
Okay.
In this case, this is one of the reasons why I used to like 2 units of 6 hearthguard for certain reasons. But for whatever reason, I knew that if I lost 2, I couldn't use the pack. I don't know why that influenced me, honestly, because the pack is probably the ability that I've used the least on the entire board. We got a lot of other good stuff here. Sometimes if you just want an early stage while you're positioning and you're wanting to spend all your dice to get yourself set up and in range and stuff like that, sometimes you can maneuver 3 or 4 units into range. Not actually maneuver, just activate them into range, and then hit the pack, and then we get some bonus. It's nice, too, for armies that have a lot of defensive abilities against shooting, which honestly, as we look through the boards, isn't that common. We really don't have a lot of shooting reactions these days. But it's nice to be able to skip them when they do show up.
Yeah, it seems pretty pricey for a rare dice.
I think the bonus is that it skips the defensive aspect of it a little bit.
Got a little extra juice there.
And in my mind, though, you're always the best you're usually going to be able to do is have 3 units in. You can probably get 4 in, and you can probably, if you're built around just doing this ability for some reason, I'm sure you can find a way to get more. Same with if you have one of the special characters later on, we'll talk about a little bit, and you want to run a lot of Levy units for whatever reason. I'm sure you can get a lot of these guys in, but you're also filling up the field. You ask yourself, is it worth the rare. It's something that I put a rare on there at the beginning stages when I say I'm not going to use this for anything, and we might pull it off later. It's one of the only times I've pulled a rare off the board because I just needed it for other activations and stuff like that. So,
okay. Yeah, so situational, kind of fun to have, but maybe kind of pricey, and you got better bangs for your buck. So, all right, I'm gonna let you do Wrath of the East here. We've been building up to this moment, Steven. This is
the moment where the Pagan Rus board goes from, oh, that sounds pretty good, to whoa, oh man. Something that I've really noticed in second edition, and I'm sure all the other players have too, is that everything seems a lot more powerful. Everyone's kind of throwing bigger combos. Everyone's seemingly generating a lot more dice. The first game I ever played, we had these massive combos going against each other, but when the dust settled, it was about the same as it always was. There's just so much dice going back and forth. Wrath of the East is how Pagan Rus get their dice. This is how they get a lot of dice. It's in orders for a common and an uncommon, which is, again, a very cheap price. Everything's cheap on this board. Until the end of the turn, each time one of your units' armor increases or decreases during a melee, it gains 2 attack dice and 2 defense dice. And so we have all of these abilities over here, plus the fatigue that's going on. We can be changing our armor all around using these abilities and stacking up handfuls of dice the entire time that we're doing it. This is one of the ways that we can end up using black bears later on and not feel so bad about losing stuff, because we're just generating buckets full of dice on here. It's one of those times, though, too, where you ask yourself, do I even care about raising my armor up by 1, or am I just doing it for the satisfaction of knowing that I'm getting 2 more attack dice and 2 more defense dice? Sometimes you might use that to cover the cost of black bears, the dice that you're going to earn from it. So you can toss 2 attack and 2 defense or something like that to raise warriors right up to what they were. And it affects your entire army. It's not like you're waiting for just one unit that you've designated or something. This is a powerful ability. It's defensive, too, in the sense that when you're fighting somebody else and they want to burn your fatigue to drop you down, suddenly you got 2 attack and 2 defense dice. Now, it only lasts for your turn, so it's not going to be happening in your turn. But if you wanted to take a ballsy charge that was going to add on some fatigue for yourself, or you didn't care about blasting yourself with frozen winds the last turn or something else, those are some times where who cares that it's going down. You might drop my armor, raise it up, drop it down, raise it up several times in the course of the combat, especially with how new fatigue works. You might raise it, use something else, he drops it, raise it again. Honestly, you'll find that no one really starts messing with your fatigue when you have this on, because they don't care. All they want to do is raise their own armor, and they're not too interested in giving you more attack and more defense dice. You can very easily take your warlord and cap out at his max attacks as soon as you've gone into combat with somebody. When you have this, a fatigue maybe in the play, and then white wolves or something like that, you have tons of dice immediately. So you might go in with the warlord, raise him up with the fatigue that you put on there with frozen winds. So he's armor 6. There's 2 dice and 2 dice. And then you use white wolves to go ahead and give yourself 5 more attack dice and 5 more defense dice. But because you dropped your armor down, you get 2 more attack dice and 2 more defense dice. If you wanted to get silly with it with Blood Feud and raise your armor back up, and there's 2 because you didn't care, because you were going to also get 2 more attack dice and 2 defense dice. You just got a lot of stuff going on. You have a very strong attack force. Suddenly we went from kind of this static army in last edition of moving around and having a few significant, I guess, melee abilities. They weren't really that bad, but it's not what you talked about when you got done playing the Pagan Rus. The win suddenly is not that big a deal when you're up close and you're getting tons of attack dice. But this edition, everyone can get tons of attack dice, but not everybody can get tons of defense dice. And in this case, you get hordes of defense dice.
Yeah, getting both at the same time.
Wonderful. This is one of the reasons that I said Quigon over here is not that appealing to me. You have so much other stuff going on. Sometimes you might use that in a pinch, or you just have some extra dice and you need to put it somewhere and you don't want to put it on the combat bonus or something else. We've got a lot of other things that we can do here. But we also see that Wrath of the East really blossoms when we've taken some time to get fatigue on other units, get ourselves into good position, and try to keep ourselves at full strength so that we can make risky decisions if we need to, dropping our armor down to 3 because of some of the abilities on here. But we know that we are sitting on 10 defense dice on the back, so we say, like, who cares if it's armor 3? It's just great. Saga isn't generally a handful of dice type of game, but it gets handful of dicey if you're running, a big units with Pagan Rus.
Yeah.
I like running 8 hearthguard a lot, and 8 hearthguards suddenly are maxed out at 32 attacks. Not too hard if you start playing around with this type of stuff. Actually, now I think, I don't know if you can hit 32 or not, but you get a lot of dice and a lot of defense dice to go with it.
Yeah, the fatigue of the units going in and how those are used to max it out. It's beautiful to watch, like the first time. Even when you're like, it's happening to you, which is what happened to me when I was playing Sean at Adepticon, and just moving the unit up and seeing the Wrath of the East like a machine, and all these other abilities are like cogs in there to power it up. And to go back to Quigon, yeah, it's like completely separate. Like it's not part of the machine. So if you're working towards Wrath of the East and getting the most out of that, yeah, it doesn't make sense to use that ability. So yeah,
like we said, it's the same price as combat bonus. But boy, Wrath of the East, that's really what seals the deal. It's how it can afford to compete with some of the hyper aggressive melee war bands that exist. The Norse Gales, up until their recent change, to me, were the absolute most aggressive, top attacking war band.
Boys, yeah.
And I'm sure that they're still extremely good. You just have to change your plays around. It might be a little bit more risky than it used to be, throwing a Levy unit in and getting tons of auto hits and all this stuff. But suddenly you can smile at a lot of auto hits because you have just buckets of defense dice. And this is why we talked about closing ranks too. Suddenly all of these defense dice, you close ranks and stuff just bounces right off of you. The Scots are extremely tough, but the Viking factions usually don't have something as defensive as this. You're usually not just bouncing straight off of them, and that's something that these guys do wonderfully.
Mm-hmm. Very, very resilient.
Right.
More so than their Viking brethren. So cool. Yeah, great abilities here. Cool to see how it all works out. So yeah, going through everything. Like I said, mix of warriors. I think of Hearthguard, you can do whatever the heck you want. You're probably going to be all right. Not too much ability specifically for a Levy, but just the versatility of a Javelin might see you through at some point.
That's basically what it's been to. Javelin's just nice. They change it now, so you're not getting the +1 charge against other combat infantry and stuff like that with the Javelins now. But you still get it against other Javelin guys, cavalry, all these sort of guys. And sometimes that synergizes pretty well. Sometimes I used to just want to use the Javelins as a battery to deliver some +1 attacks, and I'll use the board to go ahead and get it up to its max attacks of 8 somehow. And having 8 +1 attacks, conveniently positioned is just another nice tool to have, even if your board is not really built around it. And so I always like the 1 Levy unit. My list that I kind of like across the board is one of the most standard plain Viking style lists that I ever see, which is 2 points of Hearthguard in a unit of 8, 3 points of warriors in units of 8, and a unit of the Levy there, which is just a 6 dice army. And it does well with the pack. Again, I felt attracted to the pack to want to do this stuff. In my mind, I wanted to use the warriors a lot of times with these heavy defensive abilities to just go ahead and absorb for a while, get the fatigue on things, and then let the Hearthguard and the other principal units kind of explode at beyond turn 3. In my mind, this is an army that wins at turn 4 to 6. You're not going to wipe them out right away, though you potentially could. But I feel like because it doesn't have a lot of advantages and stuff when you're moving around, it's kind of slow in the sense that it doesn't have anything to boost, no cavalry or anything else like that. This is one that is pretty good in a lot of those situations. So
cool. We've talked about the last time we chatted. In Saga is a game where you have a lot of control over the terrain, and you can often get pieces similarly positioned in multiple, as you play multiple games. So is there a setup that you like with the Pagan Rus that you try to get?
This is one of the ones that's going to be pretty flexible. Like I said, if I can, I always like to kind of split the board in the middle and have 2 areas that things are funneled into. But that really depends on what's going on. I like to be able to create gaps that are big enough that if I want to, I can put a unit in there with Blizzard and take full advantage of the fact that no one can go around me unless they want to truck through terrain, in which case it's already going to be the same as coming at me or something. The new terrain game is a little, it's a little different. Depending on who goes first, you have a lot of play. Only one person is going to get to flex that around on the table, get to move one piece. The other guy can potentially put down a lot of pieces. If you're playing against Irish or something like that, there's no reason they're not going to put, a minimum of 3 pieces of their own on the table first, or make sure that there's a 3 across the board. So in general, there's also not a lot of big reason for them to get into terrain. You can see a lot of ways that their defensive abilities might stack really well with hard cover and other stuff like that, but they're already an army that takes hard cover with them. Because, again, hard cover is just closing ranks nowadays. Unless you're fighting against a lot of shooters or something else, then you probably have some other problems. And if they're long range, you already have your own tools. You have winter and other things like that to try to slow them down a little bit. But
okay. What factions do you feel you have the upper hand against, and what are your trickier factions to play against, would you say?
So what you pointed out right away, too, Last Romans and other things like that, Normans are going to be ones. Normans in particular, who I feel like are extremely strong this edition. Things have changed with the envelopment changing and some of this other stuff like that. But they're still a really good board. Carolingians are a good board now. Cavalry units are popular in all around and stuff too. So any army that does well with cavalry is one that I want to go up against with Pagan Rus, because we're already hurting long charge distance. But sometimes, this would always happen to old Pagan Rus players too, sometimes you want them to come charge you. Sometimes you want them to come steaming at you, and you use Biting Cold instead to strand them rather than slow their entire ability to come at you. If you want them to charge you on multiple fronts or something because your board is loaded or something, Long Winter is not something that you want. A lot of armies can't soak up multiple charges in a turn, but there's enough defensive abilities in here and the ability to close ranks that you could conceivably stop a few small engagements and not have to blow all of them at once in one massive defensive combo. And if someone's going to come at you really hard, you have Biting Cold to go ahead and cut it out right away too. But factions that they do well against, I don't know if they really have someone that is the one that they do terrible against. I think guys that Irish come to mind. I've never played the Irish with the Pagan Rus, but they come to mind because they want to be inside of terrain, and they're going to shoot from terrain, and their shooting is not hurt unless they're taking the dogs or something else. They have abilities to skip through uneven terrain like Blizzard and stuff like that. Or actually, that might be Welsh. I might be mixing those two up in my mind a little bit there. But some of the lighter Javelin units can be maybe a little bit threatening just because it's harder to reach out and touch them. But I don't feel like you're too worried about it a lot. If you have these guys that are coming and going a lot, we have ways to stop the bobbing and weaving. We have ways to slow them down with fatigue. This is just a really balanced army, I feel like. They can handle the melee machines. They can handle the hit-and-run guys. They can handle the long-range guys. And I'm just, like I said, genuinely surprised that I don't see Pagan Rus show up in tournament reports. I never see a Pagan Rus player in the top rung. Sometimes I'll see a 24-player tournament, and it has no Pagan Rus. I think I can't believe these guys are so unappealing. Again, when you get to Wrath of the East and you're chunking through there, maybe it's because they don't have an obvious kind of fast combo. And what I mean by that is something that you can get in there, get done quickly, and it changes the entire game or something. They have to kind of trudge up there a little bit, and then get through. They don't really want to overextend themselves, though they can. If Wrath of the East extended to the other turn, then it wouldn't matter if you're running around hurting yourself and stuff with fatigue. But I still, again, fatigue is a dangerous game with them because they don't have a way to get it off. So if they're fighting another Warband 2 that I feel like can really saturate them with fatigue, I feel like it's an issue there too. But honestly, there's not tons of those right now. I think some of the, we got Anglo-Danes that toss stuff out. We have the Steppe Tribes board. The Huns board passes out fatigue sometimes. I'm even struggling to think a lot of the big fatigue boards right now. You see some more of them when we go into the Crusades era. And it'll be really interesting to see how these guys perform if people go ahead and decide whether we want to open up and have Crusades and medieval or Viking Age guys in the same tournament. That'll be really pretty wild. I'd like to see what that looks like. So far, we haven't seen something that looks like that'd be too bad, but we don't want to get off too off
I think
top.
it would be, yeah. I think it'd be fine. Maybe mixing it up there. I guess we'll see an Adepticon here.
Right.
But cool. Well, yeah, that's some great chat about
Absolutely.
the Pagan Rus. Let's kind of take a peek at the legendary units real quick before we go.
Right.
Some interesting chaps here.
Right, we got two guys that I like a lot in history, but not necessarily so much in the board, in the game and stuff.
Okay.
First of all, we got Svyatoslav the First. He was, if you remember him in the last edition, he was the guy that lets you cut dice on your own board to rob the other guy of some dice. That was kind of his ability back then, and that's all that anyone used him for. He's a lot different now. Before I really get into the specifics of each of these characters, I guess the main critique I have of them is that they do a lot of really fun things. They have nothing to do with the board. They don't really have any way that a lot of their cool abilities synergizes with the board too much. And so maybe you just have a cool collection of some of these specific models and you just want to roll them out a couple times. Or maybe you like something about Rorik that we'll talk about when we get to him and you just want to do that. That's fun and all, but there's just not a lot of synergy from these guys on what we have here on the board. So we'll look at Svyatoslav first, though.
Sure.
His best ability right off the bat is not all of the legendary characters, it seems, generate 2 Saga dice. He does. He is one of the ones that generates 2 Saga dice. He's armor 5/5, pretty standard for warlords this edition. No more 5/6 and stuff. It's been fun to try to shoot at him.
Yeah,
some.
absolutely.
This is something I didn't like, is that he's aggression 6. I've never been a fan of some of these newer warlords that are less attacks than the regular guys. And so that's, he's got dull teeth or something like that. He's got the standard complement of warlord abilities, which is bodyguards, determinations, presence, pride. And then this one's pretty big for him, is that he has resilience 2.
That is nice.
That's a big deal. And so I can see why maybe that's why they tempered his aggression down and tried to balance it out or something. That's one of the only things that I could see stacking really big, is that resilience 2 combined with already how many defense dice you can get onto the Pagan Rus board. You can go churn there. Yeah. But at the same time, you're capped at 12 attacks, which isn't that bad, but it's not going to churn out just the ass-kicking amount of dice that you want to blow through units one after the other. But he's very resilient and stuff. And so, of course, we got to look then at his other abilities to make him see if it sells the point or what. But we have, as long as Svyatoslav leads your warband, the Quigon ability counts as a basic Saga ability. However, you may only trigger it once per melee. Now, I think it's kind of fun when they try to make abilities turn into basic abilities. I think that's really fun on Ragnarok with the Vikings. That suddenly transforms something over. And as soon as I see something transforms into a basic ability, I rush to look at the mercenaries to say, ooh, is there anyone can take big advantage of this? In this case, that ability, as we talked about, it's not bad, but it's not amazing. It's nice to, I guess, use it every once in a while, but again, there's a lot of other good stuff on this board.
Doesn't synergize, with your plan.
Yeah, I don't generally care so much if I would use it. It does synergize later on with his next ability, which is Mercenary of the Steppes. It says the Prince of Kiev made great use of Pecheneg and Ogu's mercenaries. A warband led by Svyatoslav is not limited to single-step Nomad mercenary unit and may include up to 3 units. Now,
interesting.
I am a big fan of Steppe Tribe armies. I am a big fan of the composite bow builds, and I've tried to make it work in this edition. I really like the Eastern Horseman mercenary unit in the Crescent and the Cross era, or the Crusades era. I'm just not that sold on this unit. The Steppe Tribes unit that they have here, the Steppe Nomads unit. It's not bad, but there's nothing on this board to really take advantage of their abilities. So I guess if you wanted to have 3 units of Steppe Nomads, I guess go ahead and take them, and if that's your appeal. But it also is kind of, to me, moving away from the idea that we also have this fairly badass combat character in the form of the Resilience 2 and all the toughness and all these sort of things. It just doesn't make too much sense. It makes sense with the history of the man, uniting his kingdoms and just crushing the Khazars and other things around the area. A lot of cool stuff that he did. But there's just no real reason to use all those Steppe Nomads. You're just going to end up not taking them. But Last ability here we have the Conqueror, which is at the beginning of the turn. You may decide that Svyatoslav will not generate any Saga dice. When this happens, every other unit in the warband gets a free movement activation this turn. A unit loses this activation if it is not their first activation of the turn. That's kind of cool. But right, and we can see that it might be kind of cool if we have a bunch of step nomads in there too, because then we're launching them forward and we're just using our dice to bring them back later on or something. But it doesn't really synergize again with the board too much. We don't have a lot of active units that are trying to get out there and move around and stuff. We have kind of a sedentary army that's moving up in one big fighting mass lots of times, or spread out a little bit. But even still,
specifically a movement action too, so you can't even charge with it. Yeah.
On that note that I said too, just in general with the Pagan Rus, I feel like one of the other good reasons to keep them clustered together a little bit is that it also inevitably makes the army, your opponent, even if they fan out, have to descend upon you once again, which brings them back into kind of a cluster too. If you funneled the terrain a little bit and you funneled where the assets that they want to hit are, they have very few choices to come at you. We're massed into one sort of area, and again, that's another great way that it lines it up to hit them with the frozen winds over and over as they group themselves back up to try to deal with you. If you fight them in the open plains against a bunch of really active guys with movement activation abilities and stuff like that, you're going to get caught up. But in general, I don't recommend just walking your guys into the middle of nowhere and leaving them there a little bit. So
doesn't quite jive with what we've discussed. Right. So yeah, I agree with your assessment there.
So there was Svyatoslav, the first guy that shows up in here, and they did kind of make the point in the rule book to say now that legendary characters are something that you're supposed to get permission to play with now. And that was kind of a thing in the past. They said that with the first round, but then we read Ragnar tell him, yeah, but he said something to the effect of, yes, but you don't have to listen to them. And they still put them back down anyway. It implied that go ahead and use it. We've worked it out. In this, they've kind of told us that they didn't work around too much with these guys, and they just kind of plopped them in there. And that's fun, and that'll be fun too. But it does kind of mess up if you're having a Legendary Heroes tournament or something else like that you get a lot of guys that you say, wow, these two guys are the same value. I got this guy giving me a couple step nomads or something, and meanwhile we have, Sigvaldi just pumping 12 wrath into their board or something like that, and you say, ooh, this isn't what I expected. So
yeah, they're pretty hit or miss, these legendary characters.
They're fun though. They have a lot of characters, it seems like. So.
It seems like more than a few let you monkey around with your unit choices, just like Rorik here.
Absolutely.
You want to dive into him?
Absolutely. Rorik is one of the. He's an example, I feel like, of the Saga 2 warlords they just wanted to do something really fun with. Because again, in this case, his big deal is that he changes your entire unit composition, which is worth talking about in itself. We'll go ahead and flip it over to the previous page just to look at for a second. He allows it so, first off, that you can have your hearthguard be mounted to represent some of the Druzina that have kind of gone in the transitive phase in between where these guys are going, where we see them later on in the Eastern Princes board. And he makes the warriors be javelin warriors, which maybe was better beforehand. It could still be really good now when we think about it. Javelins have less application, but we also know that they're not hurting as bad without closed ranks because we can toss tons of defense dice on them potentially. And then the coolest one that everyone thought was neat was that you can have Levy units that are composite bow horsemen. So you can have these 12-man units of composite bow guys, and you could take 5 units of them. You could fill the entire board with Levy, and that seems to be kind of popular in this edition. Right? We've looked at all these guys like Anglo-Saxons and Norse Gales, where we think, like, I might just take all Levy. I think the Levy sound the best. And this is maybe an army, again, too, where you could say, do I just want to absolutely fill the table with a whole bunch of these guys? You could, but again, there's nothing on the board that helps them out. There's nothing to make them worthwhile. And it's not like composite bow guys are what they used to be. You can't yo-yo up, blast people, yo-yo back without some consequences, pretty much. You're not shooting as much. You can't You can't shoot, move, shoot. You can't move forward, shoot 2 times, move back. And not only that, but with the, I don't know if any other mounted players have run into this a lot, but movement this edition with straight lines is not as easy to take a big fluid unit of horsemen and pull them in and out and yo-yo them back and forth and stuff. It gets crowded quickly.
Yeah,
and you can only make one turn and stuff like that. And when you charge a unit, you're supposed to make everybody go in a straight line as far as they can. And suddenly you have these fans, like hands shooting out across, because the way they're lined up, that's the only way to get. And you have a very chaotic, full, weird board. I don't know if I would want to run an all-cavalry army in this kind of edition of the game, unless it had a lot of hearthguard and smaller units and stuff like that. So that's his main thing. He can't have any mercenaries in his army. And the warriors have to be armed with javelins. I was seeing if you could make a choice.
Yes, they must.
They must. And I think that kind of represents kind of more wild Slavic tribesmen and stuff that we kind of see in the pagan peoples list later, and some other stuff is kind of better representation of those type of dudes, I think. But then his last ability, which they had to kind of address in the FAQ, is the Uniter. Which is at the beginning of each activation phase, the player controlling Rorik can take 1 and only 1 fatigue marker from each of their units and redistribute these fatigue markers as they wish between their units. So that can have some advantages too, especially if we're trying to yo-yo all these big, horseman units back and forth or something else. Yep. Something they had to address, though, is some people wondered if, as we're redistributing this 1 fatigue, can I take this 1 fatigue and put it on a unit that has 3 fatigue?
Exhausted, yeah, and
then so since it's exhausted, it just magically disappears. Yeah. They addressed that in the FAQ, and I don't have it in front of me, so I can't say it verbatim. But it's essentially they said no, you can't do that. It's not a magic way to make fatigue go away. And that would have been pretty cool. Oh, something I guess we skipped over with Rorik too, because I jumped right into the list. He's a standard warlord in every way except that he has 2 Saga dice, and he has aggression 10. So he has even more attacks than your average warlord, which starts to be kind of cool. Aggression 10, that's fun just when you look at it. You're not used to seeing one model have 10 attacks and stuff. But what is exceptionally odd to me is that as far as I can tell, he cannot be mounted. And so he wants mounted hearthguard and all these horsemen riding around it, but he himself has to hoof it around.
With the schmoes with the javelins are his buddies. Yeah, I did think that was kind of odd, but
the hearthguard with him can be on foot. It says they may be mounted on a horseback, so they can hoof around with him and stuff. I don't know. I don't know how a lot of people have been using their warlords in this edition. Honestly, a lot of people. It's implied that they're supposed to be bigger wrecking balls and stuff like that because they have more attacks. But honestly, I feel like in some ways they're a lot more fragile than they used to be, too. You have all this, if they take a few fatigues here and there, if someone can blast them with something like Frozen Winds, suddenly their durability is in question, and they can only pull the Hearthguard around them and stuff, too. And so I feel like my Warlord has stayed about the same as he's used to be, kind of a midfield commander. He's moving guys around, he's pitch-hitting when he needs to go in. And so I wonder how often, when they give you a character like Rorik, are they expecting that you go headlong and smash into him? I think that with Rorik you could do it. Because when we hit something with Wrath of the East or whatever, like we talk about, suddenly he can get 20 attacks.
Yeah.
And so he can get way up there really quick. He can have tons of attacks, and potentially, too, he could sling his fatigue then off to the other units. Except I think that's, what did I say? That's the beginning of your activation phase, so you're going to have to suffer the penalty of it. You're going to still have that on there and stuff. But, that could be pretty cool. The idea that we can have big combat characters running around seems pretty neat. But again, the Irish are kind of my hero wargaming for that.
Sure.
Irish are about heroes for this case. So.
Cool. Well, yeah, Rorik looks fun. A nice way to mix it up, because the Hearthguard and Warriors still work with everything you're doing. I mean, the Javelins were arguably better for some folks. Obviously, you can't close it, we're more attack, but having 20 attack dice with a +1 to hit, that's pretty good. Yeah.
Right.
Versus not being able to close rank, -1 armor. So you still got plenty of defense dice. So I think this is a way you can play with some different troops, but still use the board, unlike Svyatoslav here, where you're using different stuff, but like it doesn't make any sense.
I feel sad for him. Maybe if they gave him some more attack dice or something else like that. Again, free movements is what a lot of other boards want, and the Pagan Rus don't really care about. There's some free movements. I'd rather have Saga dice. Those Saga dice you get rid of could be another frozen wind, Give me a free frozen wind. Master of the winds. One of these sort of guys.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that just about does it for our discussion here. Is there anything in closing you'd want to address?
No, again, in summary, the Pagan Rus, I feel like, are an underrepresented faction that can sometimes be lost up in the idea that we're going to do these environmental effects the whole time. Frozen Wind's going to show up a lot, and it can be a key ability throughout the games. But the board can operate just fine in a melee capacity, which is something that the old Pagan Rus couldn't do. I don't know if it's their lack of special units to run around. Something we actually didn't talk about that I'll mention real quick is the mercenaries.
Sure, yeah. Do you...
Because in this case... Well, something that's been very odd, not odd, but we've noticed from the tournament scene from all of Saga recently in Saga 2, is that there is mercenaries in every top list, sometimes two mercenaries on every table. A lot of times it's Jarl Sigvaldi and the Gale Gate. And so he has had a nerf, obviously. He's a little weaker himself. I think he just no longer auto-generates a point for himself. And the Gale Gatehill, or again, forgive me, Irish buffs, if I'm just murdering that every time I say it, or Scottish buffs, or whichever. I'm digging myself a hole with it for sure. They, again, also don't really have anything that I feel like offers anything to the board. I really like to find that one mercenary unit that really just sparks when you put it in there. And I honestly don't know that the Pagan Rus have one. I feel like their board abilities are really good, and that's what I want to focus on a lot. Because when I look around, I want to see someone, if they have an ability to change their armor or something else like that, that could be pretty fun, because then the orders can stack. Because when we look at the Pagan Rus board, we only have the orders reaction. We only have very few things that we can use that affect the mercenaries. Yes. The Wrath of the East will affect the mercenaries. The Blizzard and Long Winter and all these sort of things, those are mostly aimed at our opponents and not our own characters. So it doesn't really matter so much. Again, people look at the Steppe Nomads because it is fluffy and it looks very nice mixed in with all of your foot units. We talked about how stagnated the army is, and that's why I like to use my Levy unit. Perhaps you could use the Steppe Nomads also in place of the one Levy unit that I take, just because you want to have something that can shoot, or you want to have something that, like I said, determination on Norse Gale's unit. Again, that's a small grievance for me, by the way, is that we have lots of abilities that are named the same thing now. There's 3 different things called determination. I think Anglo-Danes have an ability called determination. We've got the Norse Gale's determination, and then we have the Saga natural warlord ability, determination. But in this case, determination of the Norse Gales, which makes it so you can't attack, that's in maybe another nice time where we have the whatchamacallits, where are they at? Steppe Nomads reach in there. They just don't have much that excites me.
No. Yeah, on the one hand, you can make the argument that the levies aren't really synergizing, so why not use the Steppe Nomads instead? But when you go back, those levies with the Javelins, if you get the Wrath of the East going, I mean, you can still you can max them out with a +1 to hit, which is...
Those Javelins have the +1 to hit. They also are slower, so they're going to keep pace with the rest of the army so they can support them a little better.
Correct.
And they're going to have more bodies in case you get the chance to use the pack in a really good situation too. Whereas it's easier to dwindle down, the Steppe Nomad unit or something else. So all in all, they're kind of more resilient for the same point value, and they'll stick around a little bit too. And when you're fighting, I mean, even in this edition when Levy have gotten really good, who likes fighting Levy? I hate fighting Levy. And whenever you have to charge the Levy, you feel like any model of yours that dies that isn't a Levy was a waste.
Yeah,
why did you get in there? And you say like, no. Yeah. Which has been really fun, I imagine, for Anglo-Saxons, and I love the new Byzantines in the later Crusades. They're Levy just all day long. I'd be happy to take a 6-point Levy unit of that army for sure. So Scouts was another one on here too. Scouts is something that's pretty situational, and what Scouts is if you don't recall, is just an 8-man Levy unit that can have bows or javelins, and when they get inside of, they have a couple abilities, but their main was when they get inside of a piece of terrain, it no longer makes it difficult terrain for the rest of your units. And that's just something that does take away one of the only weaknesses I felt like for the Pagan Rus was if someone was bunkered down in terrain and blasted up a whole bunch or something, then we have the ability for the guides to kind of remove that. But it's a fragile unit. It costs a point that could just be my Levy anyway. I don't have to go in that terrain. We can probably figure something else out rather than go inside of it or something. So it's one that competed for a second and then disappears. Gunnar and Njal, too, are the two Viking characters from Njal's Saga. I don't really get them so much. And so I don't know if you guys have done a mercenary episode or something, so I won't talk about
not
this
yet.
sort of thing. And so basically they're just two different characters. One's kind of an attack guy, one's kind of a support guy, and their main thing is that they can call out an enemy hero unit and get some bonus attacks when they fight them, and they're somewhat formidable to average, but they cost 2 points. I'm not giving up a third of my army for Njal in this. And the thing is that kills me too, if anyone's read Njal's Saga, Njal is not a fighter. He comes from a family of fairly passive people. His sons are pretty big badasses, but they can't grow beards. And so everyone would call them dung beards and spread a rumor that they rubbed shit to make their beards grow all over their face all the time. And they said this was horrible dung beards. Njal's Saga is about a very deep feud that goes back and forth, incidentally, between some families and stuff. But I don't know, why do they give Njal in here? Who wants Njal? Njal is famous for being the foremost lawman in Iceland because he knows the law. He's like a judge. That's about it. He's not around to go fight people and stuff. He gives you an extra we obey, which is fun. But again, when we come back to the topic of Pagan Rus, they just really have no place in it. I could see them maybe showing up in the Irish. Because they have bonuses for heroes, they have a lot of things that can compound.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I love running Irish with different heroes and stuff. We won't talk about them too much. The priest obviously is a faction choice. If you want to take the priest instead of that unit of Levy or something like that, go ahead. I think a priest is a matter of choice. And I don't think too many armies are ever hurt badly because they decided to take a priest. Sometimes you want more units or something like that. You may have made a wrong choice, but priest could help. But again, when we look at the board, there's not a lot of things for rares. And I feel like you take a priest when you want to go rare hunting. And there's just not really so much for rares. Somehow, like I said, if you built a really weird gimmick army and you wanted to use the pack every turn, and it was about making all these big units get extra stuff, and just use the pack, I mean, maybe take it. Or if you really like the combos of White Wolves removing fatigue, because then we could do kind of the Viking style charge of double activate something. We're not playing static. We just move again into a charge, and then we shred that fatigue off when we get to the combat and stuff. If you really wanted to do that, you could. But I find that nowadays you're rolling enough dice that it's going to come up. Something else that's kind of a new strategy in Saga and stuff too is how big or small do you build your warband? Can you get away with a really small warband, or can you get away with a large warband? And by large and small in this case, I really only mean Saga dice. Because we can stash Saga dice now. Suddenly we could have all of these big 12-man units or something, and maybe only roll 4 Saga dice a turn, but we don't care so much because we're going to keep stashing it. And we just say to ourselves, I'm going to really focus on every other turn is when I'm trying to succeed or something else like that. Or people do the opposite, knowing that you can now roll 8 Saga dice in a turn without some sort of way or trick to get to it. If you guys can generate 8 Saga dice, you got 8 Saga dice. This is one of the armies that I don't know that's a really good idea with. I don't think this army succeeds as a multiple small unit army. And I find that in this edition of Saga, I've taken more standard size units of warriors and stuff than I ever have. I always used to min-max all my squads, and I always used to have kind of shooting and stuff too. There was always these really severe reasons in my mind that they had to be these certain sizes and stuff. And in this edition, I've run more just 8-man units of warriors than I've ever run. Obviously, you can change that around for what you want, but there's nothing inherent in the board that asks you to have a big unit or a small unit or something else. As it is, you could probably take one of those points of warriors, split it, put it in the back of the field, just like we always used to do. And most of the time, that is going to get you Saga dice, even though that you can, kill a guy and take it off or something. But I'd rather just have full fighting units a lot of the times, it seems like.
Yeah, the Pagan Rus are one of those factions where you are going to hit... You're going to hit that cap during your game at some point, most likely. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So bigger units would be better, obviously, for that. So.
And so I can see that too, having just one really big. That's why I like the 8-man hearthguard unit. I feel like it fulfills that hammer roll fine.
Solid. Yeah.
I've got as big of a cap as I can possibly have in Saga on it, and so we can go in and get tons of attacks. And then everyone else is just meant to slow them down, endure, take some edge off guys, get some pack attacks, whichever. Warriors are just there to do regular warrior stuff. And honestly, I always play a lot of tactical armies with a lot of moving pieces. I like my Frank's talk and stuff. I love an army with a lot of things that do specific things. They interact in a very intricate way, but if it goes wrong, it all explodes. The Pagan Rus aren't one of these war bands, and in a small way, it's kind of refreshing. They're all locked together. There's still a lot of headache if you stare at those 3 abilities, Black Bear and Blood Feud and White Wolves, and try to get the best out of them. Sometimes they can mess with you a little bit or whatever, but it's fun to have just an all-infantry warband. No missiles, no anything else. The Levy's in there, but it's fun to just have a good old-fashioned shield wall. It's something I didn't do a lot in the last half of me playing the last edition. It was all step nomads and bows and stuff like that.
It's like a kind of like a classic Saga, like the shield walls, pushing your guys up, all infantry, and you just got a good tight game. Yeah, great faction. If you have the Vikings, there's no reason not to run them as some Pagan Rus, and just the same models, but you couldn't play them any different, or two different play styles.
When we look at
those two.
Rorik era, that's all just regular Vikings. So I mean, they didn't get there, establish their little trading town, and start talking with the Slavic chiefs and stuff, and say, you know what, guys, we're changing our fashion. Everyone go around and get a different hat and put it on and stuff. Pagan Rus are absolutely one of the really mushy transitive times where we can pick from a lot of stuff and reasonably put it in there. The only problem sometimes with Pagan Rus models as a pet peeve for me is I'm a big fan of kind of 12th and 13th century Russian gear, and that's the stuff that we see in our Pagan Rus, or the Rus princes later on. Beautiful specific helmets that only belong to one culture in one specific area and stuff sometimes. And sometimes we can't help ourselves to just go ahead and fill this whole army. Honestly, if you like it, go ahead. I mean, no one's going to... Luckily with Saga, there's not button counters really other than like my level where we just say like, the Namia helmet is, and then you just say, never mind, whatever, roll your dice and stuff like that. Because they're gorgeous models. And there's so many gorgeous ones that are usually old. Of these really cool. The Russian Fireforge kit is one that people go to a lot, but we always have to remember that is medieval times and stuff. That's 13th century and beyond a lot of times. So sometimes we have these really cool helmets, but I feel like they transition just fine if you're saying then it's kind of Svyatoslav's era, and we're going on a little bit into the era where we're riding on horses and we're doing all this other stuff. So there's a lot of options.
Absolutely. Well, it's been tremendous having you on. You have so much knowledge and enthusiasm. It's great to talk to you. Mighty powerful beard to guide us on our Saga journey. So much appreciated, and thanks for coming on again. And absolutely, we have to have you on again discussing a different faction.
Especially when we get to the medieval topics and stuff too. I've really been enjoying a lot of those factions, and so I've got some opinions. So.
Excellent. Well, we'll hold you that. We'll have a discussion there. But that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Saga THORSDAY. Thanks to Steven. And if you like it, subscribe, do all that stuff, favorite. Otherwise, we're going to see you guys next time. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Saga!